Good morning, and welcome to this free webinar, which I hope will be useful. What we're going to be looking at today is the government's road safety strategy and what it means for fleets potentially. Now, I'm sure everybody on this call will have seen a lot of the headlines, particularly in January, about what is in the strategy. But there are an awful lot of documents out there, and sometimes it does take a lot of time to get through all of that and to work out what exactly it can all mean. So hopefully today, what we can do is just make that a little bit clearer for everybody. In terms of the sort of event, so I'll be giving a presentation myself, which is around 20 slides. We'll have a Q&A session thereafter. I'm really pleased that also we've got a couple of colleagues from our B2B team here, which is Patricia and James. So they are here to help support with the Q&A facilities. What we'll do is we'll take questions at the end, but of course there is the chat option. So if something comes up and you're a bit like me, you might think of something and then forget about it, so you just want to get it down really quickly, then do use that chat function if you want to. And then what we'll do at the end, once the presentation's over, is that James will pick up some of those and read them out. So a bit of housekeeping just before I start. Again, if I could just ask people to switch off their microphones. We are also recording this event, which I hope is okay with everybody. As I said, we'll have some written and verbal questions towards the end of the session. And we hope to be finished no later than 11 o'clock. So that gives you plenty of time to then get that sort of 11 a.m. coffee. So I'll kick off, and hopefully everybody can see the slides. If I could get a thumbs up, that would be great. Excellent, thank you very much. So I'll kick off. A little bit about us as an organisation, just before we get into the nitty-gritty. IAM RoadSmart, we are the largest independent road safety charity, and we focus on the delivery of advanced driver and advanced rider courses for individuals. Also, we deliver mature driving reviews, driving skills refreshers, etc. for individuals. But also we are an organisation that delivers training for fleet managers and for commercial organisations. So we have a range of courses, one of which is our flagship Drive and Survive course. Within that, and otherwise, we have webinars and we have toolbox talks, and these are all for business drivers. Separately, we have what we call the DRA wing of the organisation. So this is drink driving. We provide drink drive rehabilitation courses as well. And in fact, in 2025, there were around 4,000 people that went through our drink drive rehabilitation course. So what is the purpose of this webinar? So what I wanted to do was just to give everybody here a broad oversight on some of the proposed changes outlined by the UK government. This was, as I said, back in January 2026. Why do I say proposed? Well, many of these are subject to consultation. So I guess the advice is that you've got a lot of time to be able to input and to shape that consultation process. And as you'll see throughout this presentation, there are a number of areas that you may wish to get involved in. Thankfully, IAM RoadSmart's policy team has dissected a lot of this, and we hope to give you a bit of a steer on where it's all going. Why are we doing this now? Well, originally the consultation window was closing at the end of March, but thankfully that has now been extended. So we are now looking at the 11th of May. So we've got a couple of months there to be able to get all of our responses in. So I'll start from the top in terms of what the strategy wants. So it wants to achieve a 65% reduction in the numbers of people that are killed or seriously injured on our roads in Great Britain by 2035, using the 2022 to 2024 baseline. The targets for the reduction in the number of children, so under 16s, is even greater. And again, using the same baseline there. Now, this is important because actually this is the first time in over a decade, in fact, it's about 15 years or 16 years, that we've had national targets for road safety. What we've seen, particularly at the start of the coalition government, if people can remember that far that back, was a movement away from targets and actually to allow local authorities to have their own targets. But this is the first time that a UK has actually imposed this downwards. So why does all this matter? Now, a lot of the statistics on this slide, I'm sure everybody has seen or heard of once or twice. Some of these statistics are fairly standard in terms of the narrative that we always talk about, but actually there's some real costs here that are not just human costs, but that affect everybody. So the human cost, the headline figure of 1,600 people that are killed on Britain's roads in 2024, so around 4 to 5 a day, almost 28,000 seriously injured, and young drivers are more disproportionately impacted by that. Now, these figures are absolutely diabolical. You know, frankly, I always say that if this was the aviation or the rail sector, it would be declared as a national crisis. Yet in the road sector, it doesn't seem to generate as much controversy. And that's something that we as a charity want to put right, working with people on this call and everybody externally. Around 9 in 10, so 90% of those collisions will be caused by human error in some way. That just shows the role that training and education can still provide in terms of making our roads safer. The financial cost, so there's lots of ways that these are measured. These are just a few of the statistics that are shown within the Stats 19 data set. Generally speaking, we look at costs to UK PLC of about £40 billion a year when you take into account the loss of production, NHS costs, police costs, insurance costs, all of that sort of thing, business costs. So it really is something that as a sector we can do something to change to help the government with its fiscal rules. Infrastructure, so many of your drivers, I'm sure, will be using motorways, rural roads, but of course, there is a big difference in terms of the number of KSIs on each different road type. Again, why does this matter? So these are Stats 19 data. When we look at the journey purpose, so we're looking at journey as a part of work, we have around or just over 6,000 people that are killed or seriously injured. Now, that equates to about 16 a day, and that does not take into account all of the minor bumps, the scrapes, the minor collisions. So 16 people a day who are doing their job on the roads are being killed or seriously injured. And despite what you see in the graph there, where we've seen a bit of a downward trend, you'll see that much of that came during 2020, which of course was the pandemic. And then we've sort of bounced back up again, but albeit not quite at the same levels. So looking at the road safety strategy itself, we believe that there are sort of 5 areas here that are probably quite important for fleet operators, and we think that this is the reason why they should be interested in this strategy. So the first pillar, I guess, is that this is the first new strategy in over a decade, as I said. The second is that these proposals may impact upon the quality and availability of the driver pool. The third is more rigorous enforcement, and of course the impact that might have in terms of people that are driving for work. The fourth is probably the most important one out of all of this. It is the pilots that are being looked at that will involve businesses that require people who drive or ride for them for work. And last but not least, the vehicles themselves will change more quickly because the government is looking at approving I think, about 18 different type approval mandates. So as I said, we'll just go into those 5 points in a little bit more detail to give you a bit more oversight. But before I do that, you might have mentioned, you might have remembered that at the start of the presentation, I mentioned 5 consultations that are all sort of underpinning a lot of this work. So these are the 5 below, and looking in a little bit more detail as to what these might include within those consultations. So on motoring offences, you'll see things on drink driving, drug driving, insurance and MOT offences, failing to stop and report, and seatbelt compliance. I know it sounds strange, but you know, the numbers of people that are not wearing seatbelts are huge still. And you know, 1 in 4 collisions that occur on the road, 1 in 4 deaths that occur on the road involve somebody not wearing a seatbelt. Minimum period for learner drivers. So this is the defined minimum period, potentially 3 or 6 months between the theory and the practical test. The lower drink drive limits, enhanced training. So there might be something in there to do with check boxes and logbooks, which will make learning very, very different from what it is today. Mandatory eye testing for older drivers and a cognitive test that could be developed here. So again, if you've got drivers that are perhaps 70 and over, this might be something that you wish to look at. As I mentioned, the type approvals mandate, and finally on motorcycle licensing, this is a fairly big call for evidence, because what the government is looking at doing is simplifying the licensing system, reviewing training and updating the CBT syllabus. So lots there. As I go through this, I've got sort of green ticks and red crosses. Now, don't be too alarmed by the red crosses. That doesn't say that you have to do anything immediately. But what we're trying to do is just give everybody on this call a bit of a guide in terms of what represents an opportunity and what might require attention. So those 5 pillars that I mentioned a couple of slides ago, I'll just go into this in a little bit more detail. So first of all, how have things shifted over the last decade? Why is it important that as a new strategy, this is the first one we've had in a long time? Well, in that period, we've seen a significant shift. We've seen significant shifts away from, for example, people getting manual licensing, so practical tests, manual car, much more towards automatic testing now. So automatic licensing, seeing a trend among younger people. Now, what does that mean as those people filter through the system and become drivers? Does that mean we've got a smaller pool of drivers there? The number of battery electric vehicles are now consistently over a fifth of newly registered cars, compared to just 2% in 2011. So there's been a huge shift away from diesels and a huge shift towards electric. Now, with that comes different styles of driving, different understanding of the vehicle, and more technology in vehicles, which I was going to say segues me on to point 4, but I've missed out point 3. So I'll go back to point 3 just for now. Infrastructure issues. So what we've seen over the last decade is the proliferation of smart motorways. Arguably, our roads are worse than they once were. So we're seeing people reacting more to poor road surfaces, and that is impacting upon their driving as well. And as I alluded to in one of the earlier slides, because of increased congestion, we're seeing more people admitting to using rural roads. So there's been a shift away from people traditionally using the major A roads and the motorways over towards using some of these more risky rural roads. Technology, as I mentioned, so we've got more technology in vehicles, whether that's your adaptive cruise control, which I have to hold my hands up and say I absolutely love on a motorway drive, or your automated lane keeping systems, which many people switch off because they find it quite irritating. So the way our cars have been built are a lot different compared to a decade ago. Of course, higher fuel costs, higher insurance costs, and higher overheads. Now, I'm guessing everybody kind of knows what's going on in the world at the moment and what might happen with fuel prices. So we can only expect more upward pressure in that area. Even after COVID, we've seen increased traffic and we've seen stalling road traffic collision rates. It's not a pretty picture out there. And also over the last decade, what we've seen is a shift in the workforce. So we've seen much more flexible working. We've seen more overseas workers coming into the UK. We've seen the rise of the gig economy, particularly since COVID. So there has been a lot of things that have changed in the last decade. The second pillar I mentioned was about the impact on the quality and the availability of the driver pool. So, you know, will new drivers be better, or will there be less of them in the future? So at the moment, what we've got is a situation where demands for tests and lessons remain really, really high. That is putting a huge amount of strain on the DVSA's system. So this has led to concerns that novice drivers are prioritising test bookings rather than skills development. Now, what this strategy does is aim to shift that away. So you'll have that minimum 3 to 6 month period potentially. My guess is that the government will go for 6 months. That seems to be the mood music that I'm getting from officials. And with that, that means that there's an opportunity to give younger drivers far more skills, expertise when they're learning to drive. A skills logbook. So a logbook is something that has been mentioned within the strategy. That's quite important because it might give us an oversight in terms of the skills that young people are driving. Now, just imagine in a few years' time, if, for example, a fleet manager is able to access the driver's logbook and they can see very clearly what the young driver learned when they were learning to drive, what skills they're proficient in, rather than effectively having to start from scratch. So these are the sorts of things that will kind of filter their way through the system. Of course, there is that risk still that fewer young drivers will come through because of a perceived cost issue when learning how to drive. Now, if we're saying to people that they've got 6 months, they will look and say, well, I can't afford £40 every time I have a driving lesson. But that's where charities like IAM RoadSmart can make a difference. And that's something that we're looking at working with government on, should they go down this particular road. I mentioned the mandating of eye tests for over 70s because that might reduce the pool of drivers in this age group who may still be working. You know, potentially people might say, well, you know what, I don't actually want to carry on driving for work with all of this extra testing. So it might have a sort of an unintended consequence before the policies even hit the ground. So that's probably not a great analogy when we're talking about this sort of thing, but, you know, the point is that there are risks here and opportunities in terms of what it would mean for the driver pool. And just secondly here, we've been talking about motorcycle licensing. So statistically, motorcyclists are at far higher risk than any other road user of being involved in a serious road collision. So anybody that is operating two-wheelers as part of their fleet should look to engage in this because it is a fairly exhaustive process. You know, the government's aim is to make motorcycle licensing a lot more streamlined, but of course with that might come the need for additional training and additional qualifications. And I just want to draw everybody to the last part of this slide, which is, now I'll read this because it doesn't roll off the tongue particularly easily. The government will pursue legislative reform for micromobility vehicles when parliamentary time allows to provide a proportionate and agile process for regulating low-speed, zero-emission vehicles, LZEV, which could include e-scooters, pavement delivery, robots, and motorised last-mile delivery vehicles. Yes, that is not a sentence that I can remember without reading, but it is very carefully worded. And what it means is that the government is supportive of micromobility. So you might start to see legislative changes which allows people to use private e-scooters. But with that, of course, comes a lot of risk. Now, the key part of all of this is when parliamentary time allows. A government that has got a lot of other focuses at the moment perhaps might not prioritise micromobility and the legalisation of private e-scooters. So it is definitely one to watch. The third pillar that we talked about was more rigorous enforcement. Now, I mean, I could go through all of these different options here. So the reduction in the drink drive limit is highly likely. So at the moment, England, Wales, very different to Scotland. Scotland has a blood alcohol limit of 80 mg per 100. Sorry, Scotland has a blood limit of 50 mg per 100 mils. England and Wales, it is 80. So the UK government wants to bring that down. It is a devolved area. What we'll see is that is likely to change. What the strategy is also looking at, which potentially could be quite controversial, but certainly we have a lot of support within the road safety community, is giving police the powers to suspend licenses. So at the moment, when somebody is caught on suspicion of drink or drug driving, they will take the initial roadside test, and then that's got to go to be sent off to be checked. The drug driver might have to go to the police station, and that can take months to get a clarification or a confirmation of whether that person was over the limit. Now, what the police want to do is actually say, well, we believe that we've got strong suspicion, so we want to suspend your license until we can prove that it was either positive or negative as the test. So lots going on there. Drug driving. So the we're going to see new, simpler testing methods, which will help speed the system up. We may also see a rollout of drug driving rehabilitation courses, which at the moment we do not have on a national basis. So why is this important? So for both drink and drugs, it's probably time that fleet operators look at reviewing their policies at, particularly this year, I would say. And then we've got more penalties for seatbelt non-compliance. So in effect, they will look to issue points as well as a fine. And then the new drink drive limit for new drivers, which will be lowest, that will be 20 mg per 100 mils as opposed to 50. So there's quite a lot within this enforcement document, and actually the enforcement consultation is the longest consultation out of all of them. So it is definitely worth having a look at. But I think for me, what I think is most important for fleets to be aware of here is that because of all of this, it is probably, as I said, a good time to review and update the policies and maybe have a look at your training as well. What I would say is that there are lots of opportunities here to show best practice. And I know through my conversations with officials and with government that they're always looking to work with fleet operators who are really demonstrating best practice. So there's never been a better time really to demonstrate to government the work that a lot of you are doing to make your fleet drivers much safer. Okay, so this is the pillar that I said at the start that I felt was the most important one, because within this, there is a thinly veiled threat from government to mandate training for fleet operators and fleet managers and for businesses. So what they're looking at doing is piloting a national work-related road safety charter. So that will apply to everybody that has people who drive or ride for them. It will promote good practice, accountability of organisations and their workers, successfully measured on organisational engagement, initial safety impacts and culture change. So that really can be looked at as an invitation from government to people that manage fleets, to say to them, look, what are your best practices that you have? What do you see that makes a difference? What sort of training have you undertaken, or your drivers have undertaken to make a big difference? And I would say that this is a really good opportunity for people to get involved. It is a 2-year pilot. Thereafter, fleet operators may find that if they haven't engaged with the government sufficiently on this, then the government will look to review legislation mandating something like this. What might the charter look like? Well, within the document itself, there isn't much of a clue. But Potentially, we could be looking at sort of a standardized training or an accreditation process, maybe demands for compulsory drug and alcohol testing, maybe a checklist as well. So every year an organisation has to submit a checklist to the DVSA, something like that. Now, that is just me theorising. That may not be the case, but that's the sort of thing that I suspect that they might look at. And certainly the DVSA has already got programs that have been established, so it might be worth looking at some of those alongside some of the things that we do as an organisation at IAM. So the fifth pillar really is about the vehicles mandates. So on the right-hand side of the screen, what you'll see is 18 new driver assistance systems that will be type approved. What we've done at IAM RoadSmart over the last couple of years is try to look at engagement with this type of technology that is already in vehicles. So we're talking about the likes of adaptive cruise control, parking assist, all of those sorts of things. The engagement and the take-up and the use of those is still struggling somewhat. Now, about a third of drivers, particularly high mileage drivers, tell us that they are using their assistance aids regularly. But there's also a significant proportion who say that they turn it off because they find it annoying, or they just don't use it because they'd rather have complete control of the vehicle themselves. It isn't for everybody, but it is important that as we get more of these coming through the vehicle park, that I guess people and drivers are aware of the benefits of these technologies because they can make a big difference. And I suppose the final point here is that there could be insurance implications potentially. So I would encourage fleet operators to look at whether or not by turning these systems off, whether their insurance policies are still valid, because the last thing that you would want is to have a vehicle that's a driver that's involved in a collision. Subsequently, it's investigated that the assistance systems were switched off and the insurance won't pay out. So as I said, we are concerned that engagement and use of the technology is somewhat ambivalent. We do think that fleets might be losing out here and they're not using these systems to their advantage. Training and incentives to use this technology can play a key role in understanding why they're important and why they reduce collisions. The government does allude to ADAS education within its strategy as well, so it does see the clear benefits of it. What might be of note is just in the right-hand side at the bottom there, you'll see that IAM RoadSmart, in partnership with the FIA High Drive campaign, has developed an advanced driver assistance system, or ADAS, as it's much easier to pronounce, a guide which can be found on our business services section of our website. So do look that up because it's a fairly chunky document, but at the same time, hopefully it's well laid out and you can see why these sorts of systems are important and what they can do to help you. I can't just sort of say leave this without saying one more thing, I guess, which is that this isn't part of the strategy itself, but dare I say it was snuck out around the same time as the strategy. So the government has announced plans to clamp down on pavement parking in England, which is great, particularly if you're a pavement user, which I suspect we all are. But local authorities will be able to enforce against unnecessary obstruction of the pavement, unlike now, which is usually a police matter. So fleet operators, particularly those where delivery is a key part of driving for work, should look at their policies just to make sure that those are up to date. Because again, I'm sure the last thing you will want are sort of yellow stickers coming on your on the screens of your vehicles. So I'll finish off with some next steps. So advice from us is that those operating fleets should respond to the relevant consultations. A review of occupational health and safety practices should be considered and align with these outcomes of the consultation. You should engage, so there are opportunities to engage. Don't feel concerned about reaching out to government if you've got a story or a policy that you think has made a huge difference. And invest in training. I mean, 2026 is going to be quite a big year, even if the government does row back on some of these. policies, there will definitely be a change, and they are committed to those road safety reduction, road collision casualty reduction targets. So as I said, many of the proposals are not yet set in stone, but things will change in one way. That kind of brings me to a conclusion of the actual presentation. But just before I go, I wanted to flag to everyone on the call that we have an upcoming webinar. So this is the Manager's Guide workshop. It's 3.5 hours in person and online. You can book a place as an individual or have a group session. This will be on Monday, the 20th of April at 9:30 a.m. So hopefully, if we've given you a little bit of a flavour as to what our webinars are like and you enjoy them and you find them informative, then this one is very much focused on the training side. So do make sure you sign up on our website. And I am going to leave it just there, and I'd love to bring James in, my colleague. James, how's the chat box looking?
One question from Alex Nick. How easy or otherwise is it to establish driver assistance systems were turned off or on following an RTC?
That's a really great question, and I suspect that can only be demonstrated through things like telematics data and through the sort of data that some businesses or some fleet operators may have access to. You know, I would always say to fleet operators that perhaps there is an opportunity there to make sure that you engage with your staff about these sorts of systems that are within their vehicles, make sure that they understand what they are, ask them if they switch them on or switch them off. I'd probably start with the insurance policy first to see where everything sort of lies with that. But also, I would say that you know, there's plenty of opportunity there, I guess, for fleets to be able to gather as much data as possible, particularly if they're using telematics data.
Another one, Nick. You mentioned the mandatory drug testing as part of the proposed charter. How many positive drug/alcohol tests are there from RTCs, etc.?
Oh God, I'm going to have to delve back into my Stats 19 knowledge there. So what we know is that around 15% of all roadside tests come back. So this is for drink driving, come back positive. So that's overall. With drug driving, the figure is almost half. So the police have understood and now realised that drug driving is as significant, if not worse, than drink driving. And that's why there's so many proposals within this regarding drug driving. Now, alcohol, I believe, is a factor in about 1/5. It might even be closer to 1/4 of all serious collisions. I guess one of the things that I also want to kind of get across is that this isn't just about, you know, the person that will get in their car, go for lunch, have 2 pints or 3 pints, then get back in their car. I think a lot of fleets and fleet managers have almost moved on from that sort of culture, which was many, many years ago. I think what it is now is it's about also those people that are getting home after a long shift. They might crack open a bottle of wine, they'll sit there and they'll drink it until midnight, and then they'll jump back in the car first thing tomorrow morning while potentially still being over the limit. I think that is one of the big risks that we're seeing. So, and that tends to be what our research shows is things are heading towards. But just to answer the question directly, the police do more drink driving tests, hence why the percentage that come back as positive is lower, but drug driving is becoming much more of a problem. And if you speak to any police officer, they'll say, you know, it is a growing problem. And I suspect that there's many people on this call who've been sat in a traffic jam and they can have their window open and smell something quite unusual from the traffic nearby.
Samantha's asked, will drug and drink testing be made mandatory for fleet operators to do with drivers?
I think that's a great question. I think a lot of it depends on the approach to what fleet operators do in response to this. I would, as I said, I really do encourage people to engage with DFT if they can, if they've got examples of best practice, that should be shared. I think that so long as fleet operators can demonstrate that within their policies they have sufficient abilities and policies that actually wean out drink and drug driving, I'm not sure that it would be a mandated thing necessarily, because I suspect that the cost for everybody would be very, very high. But certainly I think it's worth people reviewing their policies.
So the questions for now, Nick.
Thank you, James. Has anyone got any verbal questions or any sort of comments that they wish to make?
Martin?
Yes, thank you. I was just typing and rather slowly, so a good opportunity to get it out quicker. Yeah, I was just thinking, does these proposals, do you think, apply to grey fleets as well as like proper fleets, as it were? So I work for a county council. We don't have an awful lot of actual vehicles, but we do have lots of people who are using their own vehicles for work.
Yes, I believe that they do, Martin. Now, I actually sat on a session with DFT officials last week, and within that they came up with the standard, I guess, responsibility that is it's what is ingrained in law, which of course does include grey fleets as well. So this idea that everybody has a responsibility for the safety and well-being of their drivers. So yes would be the short answer to that. Of course, in practice, how you make sure that you have all of that oversight compared to somebody that is, I guess, directly driving, employed to drive for you. In practice, how that is all shaped, I think is still open to debate, but it will include grey fleets.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay. Well, look, I'll give everybody a little bit of time back in their diaries, but I guess I just wanted to thank everybody for coming. Can you share a link to the workshop? Yes, we can. I also will make sure that maybe we can see if we can get this presentation up somewhere for people to access. Thanks for joining us. I hope it was a really useful glimpse to see what is coming. A reminder again that we have that Manager's Guide workshop on the 20th of April. And of course, if any of you are heading to the health and safety event in April in Birmingham, I believe, is it, James?
Yes, NEC.
Yes, Birmingham. We'll be exhibiting there, so do come along and say hello to us, and it'd be great to chat. But thank you, everybody. Go and grab yourself a coffee and a tea.